Wanted to make a quick video for my top 10 power rankings for promotion slash brands in January 2023. I call it brands because I'm separating WWE and NXT, and also there's other organizations that are owned by the same promotion, like New Japan and Stardom. And speaking of Stardom, let's start with some of the brands that are not in my top 10. Stardom is not in my top 10. It fell a little short. Number 10 for me was very hard. It could have been a lot of different promotions because I was running out of ones that I enjoy by the time I got to number 10. And also, I actually like Tokyo Joshi Pro more than Stardom. There's a lot of women's wrestling organizations in Japan. Right now, I like NJPW over Stardom by a little bit, but neither of them made my top 10. Of course, Game Changer Wrestling is very popular on the indies in America. I talk a lot about on this channel lately, the indie style is just not my scene, where they just hit high spot after high spot, but kick out on all of them. I find it very dumb, and that, unfortunately, that style has bled into the bigger promotions a lot over the past decade. Two, I like what GCW does from time to time, but I just can't take the indie style. DDT Pro in Japan also, they do pretty good with comedy wrestling, but it's pretty niche. But they do have a little something for everyone. I came very close to putting DDT Pro in my top 10. And before I get to the top 10, let me just say that how I am doing these top 10 rankings is by what I think is the most entertaining top 10, not by how much money they make, not by how big they are, not by how many viewers they get. This is just strictly what I do think is the most entertaining products. At number 10 is Insane Championship Wrestling out of Scotland, which used to be on the WWE Network for a while. Now it's back on YouTube as WWE Network / Peacock is doing away with their indie promotions. I think ICW used to do a lot better back in the late 2010s because at that point it was one of the only wrestling brands around that would actually try and do some storylines from time to time. They don't seem to be doing as many good storylines these days, but the main reason I put it at number 10 is because even unlike some of these bigger promotions, ICW does a good job of recapping every episode, and I think that's very important. I know Raw gets a ton of crap for a lot of recaps that they do. That's because Raw overdoes it because they are a 3-hour show. But I appreciate recaps, especially if I don't watch all the time, so that I can actually know what's going on. And ICW usually does a pretty good job of recapping what happened last week, what happened at the last pay-per-view, what's happened the last few weeks to get us to this point. I appreciate that. So for that alone, I put Insane Championship Wrestling at number 10. And I also like the fact that they have weekly TV shows. Yet a lot of the indies don't do weekly TV shows. They just do a few big events in a month or just one event a month. That's not really my scene. I like a continuing story as much as possible, which will probably be a trend throughout this top 10. At number 9, very low in my rankings, is NXT. I really feel like NXT has fallen off again over the last 2 months. It's seeming like it was under Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard when they first went to NXT 2.0, where I feel like everything is very scattered. There's no real good vision outside of the main titles. Everything else on the show was kind of just a mess, I think. I really feel like they lost momentum when they got rid of Mandy Rose, which was half Mandy Rose's fault. But her leaving really kind of put the women's division in NXT in disarray, and I don't really feel like Shawn Michaels is being able to steer that ship anymore right now. I really do think that he's become very inconsistent with his booking, similar to Tony Khan, where things will happen one week and then they won't pick back up for weeks later. I don't think that's how you get anything over in pro wrestling or in any TV show ever. And Shawn Michaels has it hard because there's a lot of green wrestlers in NXT that they are really trying to train from the ground up. But I would like to see Shawn Michaels get it back together because NXT was pretty good during the fall. But since December, they are not as good anymore. I don't know if they're just spinning their wheels to stand and deliver, but I hope that it gets better because it's pretty low in my power rankings of wrestling shows I like to watch. At number 8 is a show you could watch on YouTube. It's called Memphis Wrestling. It's trying to keep the tradition of Memphis Wrestling alive, and I think they do a pretty good job. The reason that this is high in my rankings is for a very specific cause, is because unlike some of the bigger promotions, I really feel like Memphis Wrestling understands heat. A good example of that was when the villainous person known as Aaron Roberts keeps attacking this Zay Washington wrestler and starts trying to humiliate him by cutting his hair. So they have a hair versus hair match, of course. That's what this sets up. Zay Washington wins the hair versus hair match, but Zay Washington gets a beatdown after the match from the heel and gets his hair cut again. Even though the heel lost the match, he still cuts the face's hair to keep getting that heat, to keep building heat as like a bully character. Bully characters right now in wrestling, I think, is maybe the easiest gimmick to do to get some real heat. And Memphis Wrestling understanding what actual heat is, big ups to that. Heels can go over strong sometimes to keep you wanting to see them lose or keep you wanting to see them get their butts handed to them in the future. OVW comes in at number 7, Ohio Valley Wrestling. Once the training ground for some of the biggest stars in the WWE in the 2000s. But still a good trainer and owner in Al Snow at OVW. They're kind of doing something that NWA is also doing. NWA not in my top 10. I do think OVW is doing it a little bit better. It's not something that's out of this world or something we haven't seen before, but all the top heels in OVW have created this faction where they're trying to win all the titles. Jesse Goddard's being the biggest one of Big Brother fame, Mr. Spectacular. He's in that faction. One thing I kind of didn't like at the end of December is that they turned their biggest face, Shara, heel as well, to join that faction. So I guess my biggest problem with OVW, you have this very strong, powerful faction full of villains. Not a lot of top faces to really face down those villains. So we're going to have to really see some baby faces built up in OVW, because the ones they have building right now, like Cash Flow, I don't think are viable options to really topple that faction. So I have some cons here with OVW, but it's still a weekly TV show that's very enjoyable. I love their women's champion. She's also on the Indies, Chalance Royale, who will be very annoying and beat women down while singing opera terribly on the microphone. It's kind of a one-note gimmick, but I have been enjoying it. At number 6 is probably the least known indie YouTube show in my rankings, called Rocky Mountain Pro, out of my home state of Colorado. They've been having a lot of great ideas, a lot of great characters, some really strong vignettes to go along with those characters. And I really need to point out that they are doing a story that WWE is kind of trying to do, but doing it way better. I'm talking about the Alexa Bliss story, where she seems to be controlled by either Bray Wyatt or Uncle Howdy, and it's a storyline that's going all over the place but also going nowhere at the same time. And I think it's going nowhere because they don't know where to actually go with it. But in Rocky Mountain Pro, they have this scary villain called Salem who keeps mind controlling some of the women wrestlers on the show, from Big JC to Noelle, where the character Noel has PTSD from kind of being in his cult-like state, and her friends trying to get her out of that cult-like state, only for Noel to turn on that friend and completely lose her mind and go to Salem. So they are doing a WWE story better than WWE. So I have to give them credit for that. They have a lot of really good ideas that have been coming together, and now they have Vince Russo writing some TV shows for them, and I know that's a name you say and people will groan and act like you just, if you compliment Russo, you're dumb or you don't know what you're talking about, even though Russo wrote some of the best TV episodes in the WWE. Not the best. That came a little after Russo. But Russo started that trend that I appreciate from the Attitude Era. And now that he's on board with Rocky Mountain Pro again, he wrote for them in the past too. A lot of their good ideas are coming together into good TV episodes. We have a male Karen going on from the wrestler Curtis Cole, who's always complaining about something. I think it's really entertaining. You should check it out. If there's any little indie YouTube show you need to check out, I recommend Rocky Mountain Pro right now. And number 5 is New Japan. NJPW is at number 5 in my rankings. I think that they had a decent Wrestle Kingdom. I've talked about that. I preferred their joint show with Pro Wrestling Noah. We don't know if Jay White is actually leaving or not. He's about to have a match where the loser must leave Japan. If he loses, he's out. But even without Jay White, I think that they are trying to change things up within NJPW. I've talked about it a lot. I know a lot of others talk about it online about New Japan being stale. But if anyone can pull them back up, it's going to be Okada. We are seeing some character development out of Okada like I talked about in yesterday's video. So I hope they can keep up some momentum there with trying to change things up. At number 4, I have Pro Wrestling Noah higher than New Japan. I'm watching Noah consistently for the first time ever, really. I've seen Pro Wrestling Noah shows, especially in the late 2000s. But this is the first time I've ever sat and watched it consistently, and I really am enjoying it. And a big part of that in January was nostalgia. With Great Muta on his retirement tour, he had a main event against the WWE's Shinsuke Nakamura. They let Shinsuke go back to Japan for that match. It told a great story where Muta uses his usual poisonous mist 2 times, but Nakamura is able to fight it off. He's able to kind of bite Muta in the mouth and suck out the poison himself and then spit it into Muta's eyes and use his own weapon against him for Muta's last single match to be a loss. But his very last match was taking up with Sting and Darby Allin against some old classic Japanese heels like Hakushi. Another great nostalgia play before that match was them bringing the great Kabuki down to ringside, who I've talked about in some of my 1980s videos, especially down in WCCW. Kabuki's like in his 70s now. He came down, still did some nunchuck action. It's funny because the kayfabe was back in the day that Kabuki was Muta's father, but that was kayfabe. But I still thought that was a great touch to bring Kabuki out before that. They showed a lot of respect to Great Muta on his farewell tour, with him winning that final 6-man tag match of his career. So I thought Noah was very enjoyable in January, and a lot of that was nostalgia. And number 3 for me is Impact Wrestling. It started really well in January. Anybody that's watched my Impact videos for the month would know that I really enjoyed the build to Hard to Kill, and I really enjoyed Hard to Kill. Since Hard to Kill, it's kind of gone back to kind of phoning in episodes, unfortunately, but I still think overall, because of the build to Hard to Kill and the event itself, that Impact is good TV when it wants to be. When it wants to put in more effort, Impact is good pro wrestling TV. I hope they can actually not half-ass it going forward like the last couple of Impact episodes have been, though. And number 2, I have AEW. Anybody that watches my AEW videos would know that I feel like they waste a lot of precious time where they could actually be getting more people over with their bloated roster when it comes to shows like Dark and Dark Elevation and Rampage, but they don't make the best of those episodes. And to make matters worse, I talked about how the small promotion in Scotland can have TV episodes where they actually give us recaps, but if you don't watch Rampage and the story goes on to Dynamite, AEW doesn't even take the time to give recaps about what happened on Rampage, which is something you do when you actually care about building a more audience, but clearly AEW wants to just stay with the same 800,000 folks that will consistently watch it. It has some good Dynamites a lot of the time. You will get a jam-packed show full of wrestling, but at the same time, a lot of those matches can blend together when they're doing the same spots in every match in one episode. I think AEW, it has a good roster because it's owned by a billionaire, but Tony Khan needs help booking, and he's just not going to get help anytime soon. These are his toys. He wants to continue to play with his toys, but his booking style does not measure up to the WWE right now, because it's hard for me to watch the MJF and Bryan Danielson story when we saw this MJF story 2 times before and we saw it done better 2 times before. So how is, now that he has a world title, doesn't make it better automatically just because he has a world title. In fact, it's coming across a lot worse. So I just can't compare that to the great Bloodline story on WWE and act like it's even close to that, because it's not. But they do still have a lot of good things. I am very entertained by the Acclaimed. They have a lot of great talent, but they are struggling to continue to elevate that talent. Or they elevate wrestlers very well, like Wardlow, and then completely drop the ball. And now Wardlow will be ice cold for the foreseeable future, if not forever, honestly. That could be a massive dropped ball. So I talk about other shows on my other channel that aren't wrestling, and I see a lot of the same issues with some of those shows where the writers have all this potential in the world, but they drop the ball. It's the same thing with AEW. They have so many wrestlers with so much potential, but they have a bloated roster, so not everyone can get enough screen time that is necessary to have consistent good TV, have consistent good builds, have consistent good storylines. And I see the AEW diehards who will argue to the death that AEW is the greatest of all time. And they will argue that tonight's Dynamite that will air by probably before this even gets posted, and this is before I watch the Dynamite. Every match on the card on Dynamite has a story. And it's true. Every match has a build, but doesn't mean every match has a good build. It doesn't mean every match is going to elevate the wrestlers. AEW needs more. It needs more to actually give a genuine comparison to what the WWE is doing. I get that people hate the WWE because of past things. They hate Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon had terrible booking for the last decade, if not decade and a half. But over the past year, WWE has gotten better and better, and a lot of that is a one storyline thing. But AEW squanders a lot of potential, and it's just the truth. I'm sorry to AEW hardcore fans out there, but they can do so much better, and I want them to do better. But Tony Khan has to be a better booker. And the bad thing is, so many people kiss Tony Khan's ass about how good of a booker he supposedly was, that now he thinks his way is the right way. But the gap is starting to widen between WWE and AEW. And AEW is on the bottom part of that, especially with their ticket sales. WWE, obviously my number one. They have their own problems. I think the two biggest problems the WWE has with their booking is the women's division. Triple H has done a terrible job booking that, and the fact that both of the world titles are on one person, both of the tag titles are on one person. The rest of the roster struggles, and Raw in general, without a main title, can be a really hard show to watch some weeks. But also in January, Raw 30 knocked it out of the park, in my opinion. And of course, the Bloodline story is carrying the entire promotion on its back, but it is one of the best stories we've seen in pro wrestling in 2 decades. So it's hard for anything to top that right now. It's going to be hard for anything to top the WWE over the next 2 months. But it's possible. They could make some booking mistakes with that main story, because God knows the rest of the roster has a lot of booking mistakes. But I still think that if you look at the Bloodline story, it's elevated so many wrestlers to be bigger stars. That is something that Impact Wrestling doesn't have the means to be able to do that. And AEW doesn't put in the right kind of effort to even try to do that.